So I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed, Katrina, for joining us this evening and sharing your wonderful research with us. We greatly appreciate it. And it's wonderful that our members will be able to watch this on demand and learn about your excellent work. So if you're ready, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to present here. It's a great honor. I have presented for the Northeast chapter before, but never the full Louisiana Master Naturalist Association. So very nice opportunity. Thank you, Charles, for this. But he's also letting me talk all I want about gray foxes today. My name is Catrina Weiner, for those of you who don't know, for those of you unfamiliar with. I'm a graduate student at the University of Louisiana, Monroe. I work under Dr. Anastasia Kubian, and my thesis is all about gray foxes. I'm studying specifically their occupancy within the Wind Ranger District, and I am also looking at their interguild interactions with some other mesocarnivores that are in the area. Today, I'm going to take you through different aspects of their ecology, including foxes within Louisiana, other foxes you may see, their phylogenetics or their evolutionary relationships, their historical distribution, how that relates to other types of ecology that you'll see for them, their reproduction, their diet, what types of habitat that they like or don't like, their interguild interactions, and then my specific contribution to the research here within Louisiana. So to start, what is a gray fox? Another name for the gray fox is Urocyon cinereoargenteus. Urocyon is the genus name. It comes from ora and kion, two Greek words meaning tail and dog, referring to this really long tail that you see at the end of the gray fox. All foxes, for those who don't know, are canids, and all canids are dogs. So when you hear a fox is a dog is a canid. So this is a very long-tailed dog. Cinereoargenteus comes from two Latin words, cinereus and silver, cinereus and argenteus, meaning azure gray and silver. And that's referring to the dorsal pelage of this species. It's very gray. Along the sides of their tail is also that very nice gray color. And all along their face is that gray, and they have these very dark patches along the sides of their snout. Other features that you can use to identify the gray fox, like I said, those dark features along the side of its snout, but also this dark bristle tip at the end of its tail, and a stripe that extends along the dorsal side of its tail as well, all in that dark black fur. Its ears are a slight bit more rounded than other species. Its eyes are also a bit more rounded, more oval shaped than other true foxes, like the Vulpes genus, and its snout is a bit shorter as well. The fronts of his legs, as you'll see, are also a bit lighter compared to other species that you'll see within Louisiana. Gray foxes themselves can have a bit of variability. In winter, with what you see on the top left, they can gain a lot of fat and they'll get denser fur, so they can be a bit more rounded. And then in more hot areas in summer, this photo on the bottom left was taken in Texas. They can look a lot more lanky. Even the tail kind of looks a little bit shorter here, and their fur is a lot less dense to help keep them cool. Females, compared to males, are a bit smaller, but besides that, there are no major differences that when you're looking at a picture of a male or a female, you're going to be able to tell the difference. There are some differences in the pelvis shape. This is likely due to parturition, locomotion, and weight bearing, aka females have to make young and males do not. So there are some differences attributed to that. This is a photo from one of my cameras. I put cameras all throughout the Wind Ranger District, and rarely did I find two foxes on the same camera. And when you see two foxes together, it's likely a male and a female, or a female with young, or a male with young. Because these are both the same size, I'm considering them both a male and a female. And I put this in here to show you that the males and females really don't look too different from each other. From just a photo, you're not going to be able to tell the sex unless you actually go out and sex them. So here's once again our gray fox, and then the other fox within Louisiana is the red fox. It's named so because most of its dorsal pelage is this nice red or auburn or light orange color, and there are other couple distinctive features that tell you that this is the gray fox. It has some dark tips to the backs of its ear. It has some dark tips to its legs on the front side. It has a slightly longer snout, and the dark patches along the side are a lot lighter compared to the gray fox. And it has this really distinctive white tip to its tail compared to the really dark tip on the gray fox. There is a melanistic version of the red fox called the silver fox. It's the same species, Vulpes vulpes, but it is covered in this dark black or gray pelage, so it can look a bit like the gray fox, but you can tell the difference because of this very light white tip to its tail compared to the dark black of the gray fox. There are some lookalikes that you'll find within the Americas, mostly North Americas, where you'll find these species. And they look very similar. The kit fox looks extremely similar, but it is quite a bit smaller, and that tail looks quite a bit shorter. And the swift fox also looks similar, but its eyes are a bit more slanted, like the Vulpes genus as a whole. And it's very fast, but also a little bit smaller than the gray fox. The gray fox is about 3 to 4 feet long, and the swift fox is about 2 to 3. It can vary, but it's generally within that range. So it's a bit smaller lengthwise. But they're also distributed in different parts of America. So here is Louisiana. The gray fox spans all throughout this region, but the swift fox in green and the kit fox in purple don't really go into Louisiana. So if you're here, you're not really going to see any of those lookalikes, just the red fox and the gray fox here. When we look at a phylogenetic tree of the Canidae family, we can see a couple interesting things. There are 4 major clades that we see here. At the top, we have the red fox-like clade that will include the Vulpes genus, the red fox, and the kitten swift fox are inside of there. And then in the green, we have the South American clade. And then in the blue, we have this wolf-like clade, which is where you'll find the coyotes, the dogs, domestic dogs, as well as wolves, red or gray. And we also have this last little clade at the bottom, the gray and island fox clade, which is where you'll find the gray fox. There are only 2 species within this clade. They're both of the same Urocyon genus. And if you trace this phylogenetic tree all the way back to the first branch, you'll see that it is part of that first branch. So this is one of the first branches off, part of the Canidae family. It's one of the most ancient clades, a part of this Canidae family. And that's why you hear be referred to as the most basal canid. The island fox, Urocyon littoralis, is actually kind of a subset of the gray fox. Some of the gray foxes got separated onto a Californian island and they got stuck there and they did not interbreed with any of the mainland gray foxes. So they eventually became their own species and got their own place within the gray and island fox clade. But this far back branch is why this ancient species is called the most basal canid. When we talk about the historical distribution, I talk about this because it explains some of the habitat preferences that you're going to see today. Today, the gray fox is the only canid to naturally occur in South and North America, but its range has changed a bit throughout the years. So around 800,000 years ago and before, what you see on the right is pretty much what their map would have looked like. It's not going to be exact because the time is a bit different, but the effect will still be the same. Lighter colors here are colors that are more likely to have gray foxes within them. And I just want to make sure you guys can see my pointer, right? Yes? Awesome. So I use my pointer a lot.
You want to throw it out?
And here, when I use my pointer, you can see all of these areas right here are connected.
I'm doing
Lighter areas
after it's
are areas where gray foxes are more likely to be, and the darker areas are areas where they're less likely to be based on how much their ecological niche would match. So before 800,000 years ago, we see all throughout the West, kind of the outline of the United States down through Central and into South America, connected into the eastern side of the United States. When the glaciers came and the ice sheets came about 800,000 years ago, or 0.8 million years ago, you actually see a divide. And that divide occurs right here. So this western side, all connected, but this eastern side is now left all by itself because they can't cross here anymore due to those large ice sheets. So this separates the western and eastern sides, and they actually evolve with kind of different habitats now. The western side has this great expansive land that's warmer and drier, and they find primary refugia in Mexico and California. These areas have a lot of scrublands and forests, so these foxes are going to be more keen towards those scrublands and forests. The eastern gray foxes, on the other hand, have a pretty smaller in comparison range to the western gray foxes, and this actually leads to long-term isolation and decline. This portion of America, this eastern side, is cooler and wetter than the western side, and it's more dominated by forests. So this side, the eastern gray foxes, are going to be more keen towards forests rather than scrublands and forests like the western side. After those glaciers and ice sheets receded, we start seeing recent admixture in Texas, and that's due to this massive range expansion. So this dotted line right here is their past limited range due to those climatic conditions. But after those conditions changed, they can now expand far northward up towards Canada, especially the eastern side has this massive range expansion. And then the western side is expanding a bit northward, but also more central into central United States. And you can see that area that there was no crossing over is now completely connected now. They can go in there and they can interbreed and add mix. So just to maintain continuity, here is what that old diagram would have looked like under at least semi-current conditions. You can see that South America is a bit less suitable to gray foxes now, but as you expand northward, there's this massive expansion northward. They can go up into parts of Canada, into northern United States, and much of the western side, as well as much of the eastern side that they couldn't access before. In this diagram, you can see where that recent admixture is happening. Each of these gray circles is a genetic sample from a gray fox. The more green it is, the more it is a western gray fox, and the more orange or yellow it is the more eastern gray fox. Right in Texas and Oklahoma, you start seeing circles with two colors in them. And that's because the western gray foxes and the eastern gray foxes are admixing and they're creating not hybrids, but western and eastern gray foxes. From these little slivers, the people who did the study found that eastern gray foxes are actually going more into the western side rather than the western side going into the eastern side. This zone right here is generally called the Great Plains Suture Zone because it's where that hot and dry area starts mixing with the wet and cool area. And the gray fox is not the only species to admix in this area due to those climatic conditions. So when we talk about reproduction, time has a lot of play for this species. When we talk about phenology, it's the timing of life events for a species. And in winter, January through March, you have the breeding season. And the video I started playing on the right is likely during spring, denning early puppering season, which is from April to June. This is when mom and the pups and the dad are primarily around the den, focusing all their energy there because the pups are very vulnerable right now and they're not really leaving the den. And then during summer, July to September, that's late puppering season. Pups are likely out of the den. They're following mom and dad around, and they're learning how to do very valuable skills. In fall, this is dispersal season from October to December. The young leave their parents and they go and find their own territory and their own mate for the next breeding season. That video was a mother gray fox feeding pups within her den. They do drink milk for about the first 10 weeks, but that's usually when they're fully weaned, 10 weeks, but the first 4 are primarily when they're drinking mostly milk. This species is monogamous, and I put an asterisk there for a reason. They do have one mate per season, and there is biparental care. So both mom and dad are caring for the pups. And you can see this reflected in their home range and core area overlap. So in spring and summer, which is those pup-rearing seasons, that's when the home ranges of mated pairs are going to overlap very highly. And then the core area is a little bit less, but it still overlaps very highly. And what this means is that they're sharing the area that they live together. Foxes that aren't really mated with each other are not going to share this much of their home range together, especially not something like a core area. The right part of this table is the locations where they are found together at the same time. So they're actively spending time together. During the day, they spend some more time together than at night. This may be because the pups are actually more of a diurnal individual, and the adults are generally more nocturnal, but they will flip their schedule to match the more diurnal young so they can watch them and protect them and make sure they don't get eaten by any predators in the area. Now, there is this asterisk next to monogamous because there is evidence of extraterritorial forays or breeding individuals or mated individuals going away from their territory for some unknown reason, potentially for extra copulations, and then coming back a couple of days later as if nothing ever happened. We don't super know why this happens as of yet, but one of the leading theories is extra copulations, but this does occur outside of breeding season as well, and it's not just males, it is also females, although it is less rare. So it may be extra copulations or them trying to find some novel resource. These gray foxes generally use inconspicuous dens. They don't like anything flashy. They sometimes won't even make their own den. They will use other species' old dens. And if you have a culvert in your lawn, if you have a porch, if you have a log on the ground, they will go there and they will make a den and they will be just fine there. They don't really need anything much for their dens at all. Inside of their dens, that's where they raise their pups during that early pup rearing season. And the litter sizes can range from 3 to 7, but generally it's around 4 to 5 pups. For the first 4 to 5 weeks, they stay inside of the den, constant care, constant milk from mom, but they begin to play outside the den in the first 5 to 12 weeks. This video that you're seeing on the right has some pretty small individuals. You can see another one on the left up there, and this is likely when they're beginning to play outside the den during that 5 to 12 weeks. They're quite small, but they're still quite vulnerable, so there's still that constant supervision. After 12 weeks until dispersal season, they will join the adults on hunting forays where they learn very valuable skills. Adult home ranges do reflect their relationships with their pups. During pup rearing season, their ranges will constrict because they're focusing all their energy on their pups, and they'll widen again during dispersal and mating season when they're either trying to occupy their full home range or find another breeding partner. Now, you can see this also reflected in their mean distance moved. During denning season, this study classifies its seasons slightly differently, but during denning season, you can see the amount that they move is a lot less than during something like dispersal and mating season, where they're actively going out trying to occupy their home range or find a new mate and use all the resources that they have. It is a little bit larger in pup rearing than denning, but it's somewhat similar to dispersal season. Now, this is likely during late pup rearing season, and I put this in here because you'll see that tree climbing becomes a very valuable asset for them. So this guy at the top is likely the adult, and the guys at the bottom are the young that he's teaching how to climb. So you can see the parent got up nice and easy, but all the young there are having a little bit of trouble. As you can see, they don't have their grace yet. So they're very vulnerable to predators at the moment. That's why you constantly see mom or dad with them, making sure that they're protected, that they're okay, and there's constant vigilance on them because these guys are almost falling out of the tree, quite ungainly. For diet, these guys are opportunistic omnivores. They will eat a wide variety of things. On this table to the right, we have plants, mammals, arthropods, birds, and anthropogenic material. I wouldn't be surprised if they can eat anything else, but this is just what they found inside of gray fox stomachs during this one study. We have the frequency with which it is found inside of a stomach and the volume of that specific type of food that is found within the stomach. So if I highlight these two plants and mammals, these are the two main diet items that are going to make up the gray fox's diet. They really like plants. They really like mammals, though they do like birds as well. This was from the second to last video that I showed you. One of those youngs was having a feather in its mouth. They do eat birds. I hear people talking all the time about how their chickens get predated by gray foxes. Some studies say yes, some studies say no, but a lot of people are saying that their chickens get predated by gray foxes. There is human influence on what types of diet items and in what volume of diet items that they eat as well. So if I highlight these two columns, we have residential gray foxes that live in residential areas, and we have undeveloped areas that contain gray foxes. So these are gray foxes with not so much human influence on them. In these undeveloped areas, you see that they eat plants quite frequently, and they eat mammals somewhat frequently, but definitely less so than plants. But they also eat a very high volume of plants and not a super high volume of mammals. But in residential areas, you see less frequent ingestion of plants and more frequent ingestion of mammals. And you also see that they eat a higher portion of those mammals and a lower portion of those plants. And it could be for what resources are in the area, or it could be that there is water from these anthropogenic structures. So we have a little bird bath right here that this gray fox is drinking from. They can drink from running faucets, swimming pools, dog dishes you lay out. There's a lot of sources of anthropogenic water that they can drink from. Plants are a very hydrating sort of food if you eat certain things like fleshy fruits, and those can hydrate you a lot. I see a raised hand.
Hi, sorry, Katrina. Yeah, so a question was raised. Casey asks, what is the unit of measurement
What is the unit of measurement for
for
the current diet analysis?
yes.
So the unit of measurement, it's like percent volume.
Okay.
It's not quite a unit. It's like 62.6% of the time plants are found within a gray fox stomach. 37.9% of the time, or 39.7% of a gray fox's stomach is filled with plants on average. It's more of a proportion rather than a unit.
Okay, thank you.
I will open my chat back up so I can see those. Or, well, maybe I won't. I don't know how to do that. But to continue, these are all proportions. These are not quite strict units of measurement. But we do have that human influence from that water, but we do have, oh, there we go. We do have some other things that they can eat as well. Inside of residential areas, they can eat anthropogenic material. This can be compost, this can be trash, this can be food waste left around. It can be all sorts of food items that they can eat because they are highly opportunistic omnivores. There is also an influence from agriculture. Plants are a large portion of their diet, as we just saw. But if we look at this, we can see that persimmon, this is from Maryland, so persimmon naturally grows here, and it's like 80 to 90% water within its fruits. So it's a highly hydrating fruit. That's why they don't usually need to eat as much. That's why they eat more when there's less water around, and it occurs a lot within their stomachs, but the percent by weight is not as much as something like corn. So if I highlight these two species, corn and apple, these are most likely planted. These are from plantations or something of the sort. That's why you see them quite often, especially with the corn, and also a high percentage by weight with the corn, because it's a readily available food. Maybe it's not the most nutrient dense, but it's readily available, it's easy, and they're going to eat a lot of it. Same with the apple, more hydrating as well. The black cherries and wild grapes, another hydrating source if they're other fruits. And then, interestingly enough, there is the ironwood, which is less hydrating. Maybe it's the leaves they are eating, but it is not very common and not much by weight inside of their diet. If we compare the gray fox to the red fox, we can really see how omnivorous this species is. So the red fox, I've highlighted all the significant areas. The red foxes eat by occurrence and the percentage of the time they're found in red foxes' stomachs is around 82.8%. They eat mammalian material quite frequently, especially compared to the gray fox. But the gray foxes eat a much higher by occurrence percentage of plants and insects, as well as by weight plants and insects, than the red foxes. So the red foxes really like those mammals, and the gray foxes will eat a lot more of those plants and insects than those red foxes. Here is a little young one. Those rules do stay true for the young ones. They will eat plant material. These are wild strawberries, if you can see. And this was, I believe, around the Adirondacks. So this is around New York, I believe. But another large portion of their diet is small mammals. I have from a study in California a nice little table here. I've segregated it into three main groups. The green is the rodents, and the blue is the rabbits, and the orange is the squirrels. And yes, squirrels are rabbits, or squirrels are rodents, but they make up sometimes a pretty significant portion of their diet, not so much in this study, but I wanted to highlight them for that purpose. You have three main things we're seeing here by weight this is, and you see the dusky-footed wood rat here. In Louisiana, we likely have the Neotoma floridana, the eastern wood rat, and then we have the Peromyscus subspecies. Some species that are found here are the cottonmouse, North American deer mouse, and golden mouse. And then we have the cottontail rabbit genus right here. And here we would have the swamp rabbit and eastern cottontail rabbit. But these are the high ticket items for gray foxes in these areas. But we do see some very interesting items here. Otocoileus hymoneus is a deer species. There's not much, but this is likely from carrion. So this species will eat maybe roadkill or something of the sort if it is available. And they may even eat a domestic cat. Potentially it was carrion or potentially it was hunted. I do not know from the study, but it was present in a stomach. Another uncommon species we see here is a bat. You can see its wings and its little face right there, but this is going inside of a den. This is likely a mom or dad bringing back food to feed to the pups. And not a very common food item, bats, but they will eat anything they can get their hands on. When I talk about habitat, I think it's important to emphasize that no trend is absolute, especially for a generalist species like this. For the gray foxes, everything in gray on this map to the right is where they are located, where you can find gray foxes. And all the colored spots relate to how many studies there are about habitat preferences. So in California, there's 8 studies, that's quite a bit. Over here, there's 3. In other areas, there's 2. Other areas, there's 1. But the majority of the time, there's no studies about gray fox habitat preferences. And that is also true for Louisiana. So that's why no trend is absolute, and we can't really infer trends right now because a lot of the places don't have studies to show what that trend is. We know that gray foxes have a high capacity for adaptation, potentially not as much as other species. There may be some limitations that I'll talk about later, but here are some general things that I've noticed. This won't be true everywhere, but it is a nice starting point. Heterogeneous habitat, hardwood forest, coniferous forest, and chaparral and shrub habitats I see somewhat common. Chaparral and shrub habitats are mostly from the California area. They do have enough cover for predator evasion, but this is mostly going to be something for the western gray foxes. And for the other gray foxes, mostly the eastern ones, forest cover is most associated with occupancy. There are different forest types it could be, like hardwood forest, coniferous forest, mixed evergreen, but especially in older documents, you'll see deciduous forest repeatedly mentioned. Now, the gray foxes can inhabit urban areas. There are 3 kinds of ways an animal can interact with urban areas. They can be an urban exploiter, where they go into an urban area and they thrive and they reproduce and they survive and they do absolutely amazing. That's something like a northern raccoon. There can be an urban adapter, which goes into an urban area and it can do well there. Maybe it won't do great, but it can be there. And that's something like a gray fox. And then you have urban avoiders, something like a bobcat which is going to be more so forest interior, doesn't really like humans, and won't survive and thrive within dense urban areas. We know that higher forest cover makes urban use less likely. That's why they're an urban adapter rather than an urban exploiter. They don't choose to go into those urban areas. And some people posit that these urban areas, because some larger bodied predators may avoid those areas, it may act as like a human shield. But currently, there's no evidence of avoidance of larger predators and higher housing densities for gray foxes, because species like coyotes will go into urban areas, and some studies that I've read have classified them as urban exploiters. So they're even better at using these urban habitats than gray foxes. But gray foxes can make dens in urban areas. What you see on the right here is two separate instances of a gray fox making a den right under a porch. Like I said, they don't really need much for their dens at all, but they will raise them in your backyard if you do let them. When talking about habitat, it's important to know whether a species is territorial or if it has defended home ranges. The gray fox is territorial and it does have defended home ranges. Their home range sizes are variable and they depend on the quality of the habitat. The larger the home range is, the more likely that it's a lower quality habitat. And the smaller the home range, the more likely that it's a higher quality habitat because they don't have to travel as far to get all these nice, useful resources. The most reported range that I've seen is around 200 to 300 hectares, and that's mostly around Georgia, Mississippi, but there is a wide range for home range sizes. I've seen 60 up to 600 hectares as reported for the gray fox, and that's a 10-fold increase or decrease depending on how you're looking at it. So it can vary widely for the species. Now, home ranges are not bounded by roads. Some other species, like bobcats, can find it very difficult to put a home range on top of a road or put it near a road because they more like forest interiors. But the gray fox, not so much. This map that you're seeing on the right is from Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and these circles on it are home ranges. Now, you can see this home range right here goes right on top of the road, and these little circles over here right next to the road, on top of the road. This is Tennessee Valley Road. I don't think it's a very major road, but they still will cross roads. And the first time I ever saw a gray fox was actually on a major highway when it was crossing the highway. So they can readily use roads. When their home ranges do include residential areas, they can get kind of funky shapes. So you see this home range here, and it has this little outcrouching, still somewhat regular shape, but in residential areas, you can see long peninsulas where they travel forward to get something and come all the way back, maybe at a weird angle, go out over here. In residential areas, they are kind of restricted by where the houses are, where people park their cars, where they put their fences. So there can be a bit more barriers inside of residential areas. So their home ranges will sometimes increase. They'll get these wonky shapes, and maybe they'll use it a bit less if there's high quality forests nearby. Home ranges and core areas may change to avoid dominant predators. The new kind of diagram I put on the screen is of two male gray foxes. Here is one right here. This is his home range. And here's another one. This is his home range, this peanut-shaped one. And then this heart-shaped large one is a coyote. These smaller circles inside of here, this one is the core area of a coyote, this two. This small one right here is the core area of one of those male gray foxes. And over here is the core area of this other gray fox. And you can see that these home ranges do overlap with the coyote. It can be actually quite heavily overlapping with coyote for this gray fox, less so for this one. But these core areas will not overlap with the core areas of a coyote. It's very rare that you'll see that, and most of the studies that I've read have said that the gray foxes will put their core areas the time that they put most of their locations at, far away from where you would find most of a coyote's locations. And that's because they're more of an avoider than anything else. This gets me into what I consider the most interesting section, interguild interactions. A guild is a group of animals that occupy a similar niche. So mesocarnivores, medium-sized carnivores, and omnivores occupy the same guild because they're similar size and they eat both meat and plants and resources of the like. So they're likely going to compete with each other. So they are in the same guild. In the absence of apex predators, something like a puma or a black bear or a pack of wolves, mesocarnivores become the apex predators. Louisiana used to have black bears and pumas and those wolves. We still have black bears and some black bears in some regions, but they're not as prevalent as they once were, I do believe. So their effects are not going to be that widespread. We do have the American alligator, but it's not terrestrial. It is an apex predator and it is very widespread here, but it's not going to have much effect on this mesocarnivore guild, especially the gray fox, I don't think. Bobcats and coyotes are a part of that mesocarnivore guild, as well as great foxes, as well as northern raccoons. And we know that bobcats and coyotes can predate gray foxes. If I pull up this picture, this one right here, this is actually of a bobcat predating a little gray fox cub that came, or gray fox pup that came out of its den, likely during early pup rearing season, but it was unattended to and it got predated. So we know that gray foxes are not the top tier predator here. They are predated on by other species within the area, especially Louisiana. This video right here, this tail that you'll see right here is a gray fox tail, and it comes in through a couple times, so you can see the movement in the back. As you can now see, there's a coyote coming up right after the gray fox, and when he moves away, he's searching for the gray fox, catching the scent. You'll see in the back there's even more. There's 3 of them total, and they're coming through, likely hunting the gray fox, because as I said, they will hunt gray foxes and they will predate them. So there is competition for the same resources as well as direct predation by bobcats and coyotes. Gray foxes, because they're not the top of the food chain, they have to find some ways to avoid the dominant predators as well as other competitors. They'll do this in space, they'll do this in time, but another way they do it if they have a direct interaction is to climb a tree to get away. This does flash if you're light sensitive. They will climb a tree to get away from other predators and competitors. And as you can see, they're very frantic, they're very good at it, they're very fast. Especially against something like a coyote, this is going to be very effective because gray foxes are the only canid in North America that can climb trees. The raccoon dog, or Nycteroides procyonoides, can also climb trees, but this is more of an Asian species, so they're not going to interact with the gray fox. The gray fox does this by using its rotating wrists and semi-retractable claws, and you can see it puts its hind legs on the back of the tree and pushes up with them while the front legs will grip around the edge of the tree. It's hard to see because they do it so quick because they're so good at it when they're older, but that's how they climb up the tree. They use their legs to bound up while their front legs kind of grip the sides of the tree. Due to this novel ability, they can get away from something like a coyote pretty well if there's trees nearby. It doesn't work against something like a bobcat, which can climb trees, but it's good against coyotes. This is kind of the explanation for why they prefer climbing rather than fleeing. This is a limit on which habitats they can inhabit, because to climb, they do need trees. On that western side, when we saw that preference for shrub and scrub, it is a little different due to that high cover, but especially in eastern areas and places like Louisiana, it's likely that climbing is the main way they're going to get away from predators. This is another way that gray foxes are highly adaptable, but not so much as other species due to that slight limitation from liking to have those trees nearby to climb and get away from predators and competitors. This new figure that I put on the screen is kind of predicted occupancy. This little sign right here is predicted occupancy, and the higher the color goes, the more likely they are to occur in an area. We have higher housing densities over here and more forested areas over here. So as we transition through, you go from forested all the way to more urban areas. And all the different colors relate to different species. this orange color right here relates to red foxes, and they have very high predicted occupancy in very housed areas. And it goes down as they go towards the forest. And this blue color right here is the gray fox. They're highly likely to occur in forested areas and less likely to occur as you get near housed areas. And there's very little area of overlap here. Remember, they like trees, so this is nice for them. But when we put the coyote into the mix, this pink right here is the coyote. We have high predicted occupancy for the coyote in the forested area. And as we get to the higher housing densities, it kind of drops off. But when the gray foxes were just with the red foxes, they were in the forested area. But now that they're with the coyotes, they've switched entirely over to that more urban area. So they have high predicted occupancy in this urban area, completely opposite to what they were with the red fox. And there's little area of overlap here because they want to minimize how much time they spend with more dominant predators and competitors. If we add both the red fox and the coyote onto the gray fox over here, we can see that the coyote is in the same area, the red fox is in the same area, except the red fox is actually a bit limited by the coyote because it stops over here in this graph, but stops all the way over here when it's only with the gray fox. So this coyote is more dominant than the red fox, and it's limiting its distribution as well. There is now no area inside of here that is devoid of a competitor like the red fox or a predator like the coyote. So the gray fox doesn't achieve very high probability for occupancy anywhere. Instead, it stays at this low probability of occupancy and it gets just even lower and just has a low probability of occupancy everywhere instead of having one place where it spends the most, is most likely to occur. If we add in another species, this yellow right here is the domestic dog. Things get interesting now because we don't actually see a change from the domestic dog. We know some dogs are even bred to chase foxes, to hunt foxes. We know that dogs will mess with the wildlife around them. So why is there no influence from the dogs here? This is likely because they exist in different time. So while the gray foxes and the red foxes, the higher these lines are, the more active they are at a certain time. So from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., gray foxes in blue and red foxes in orange are more active at night. They're more nocturnal and they inhabit the same time slot. So they exist in different spaces. Gray foxes and coyotes, once again, exist during the same time, are most active during the same time. And coyotes get a bit more active in the crepuscular areas as well, but they are more of a nocturnal species like the gray fox, and they don't have much activity during the day. So they just exist in different spaces so that they don't have to see each other during the same time. Dogs, when we add them to the combination, don't really change anything because they're highly active during the day. So there's no reason for the other species that are active at night to change their spatial locations to avoid interacting with the domestic dog because they don't see them because they're active at different times of the day. When combining spatial avoidance, like what we saw with the gray fox in these top two, and this temporal isolation, we see spatiotemporal partitioning of the environment. So more species can live together if they have different schedules, even if they live in the same area, because those differing schedules allow them to exist in the same area without ever interacting. And this is where I come in. So I'm currently researching in Louisiana, gray fox occupancy and interguild interactions. Now, this is important because all those different habitat preferences prevent transferability or the ability to use the knowledge gained from one place in another place. I've put back in the map I had before of all the places with studies on it, and we can see Louisiana is unstudied. Some states around Louisiana are unstudied. Texas has some studies, some states in the east have some studies, but because there's different combinations of mesocarnivores because there's different combinations of some areas still have their apex predators, some different combinations of the habitat preferences. We can't really use the knowledge from Mississippi in Louisiana or the knowledge from Texas in Louisiana, at least not with very high confidence. So I set out a bunch of camera traps all throughout the Wind Ranger District of Kisatchie National Forest to determine what areas are more likely to house gray foxes. The Wind Ranger District of Kisatchie National Forest is right here in this light yellow beige color. It's in kind of central Louisiana, north-ish central Louisiana, and it's mostly well-managed upland pine and bottomland hardwoods. This has a regular fire schedule. It gets regularly burned. There were burns while I was studying this area. And there is private land very interspersed inside of the Wind Ranger District, especially near this area right atop Catahoula Ranger District. And that private land means there is different influences from humans on the area. And remember, these are urban adapters, so potentially that could have some interesting effects on where the gray fox is most likely to occupy here. Inside of the Wind Ranger District, we also have the Saline Bayou National Wild and Scenic River, and that's cool because there's more human influence there. We got some wetlands and herbaceous wetlands here as well that could have some interesting effects on gray fox occupancy. We also have extensive deer hunting. There is hunting for other species here as well, but from what I've seen, deer are the most sought after species here, and there's also the Gum Springs Campground and Horse Trail. So I haven't seen studies with the effects of horses on anything. Would be cool to see how that impacts anything, if it does at all. My next slide includes a map of everything that I have sampled. So I've sampled 45,000 hectares of wilderness, which is quite a bit. And we've sampled the whole of the Wind Ranger District. Each little black dot on this map and little red star are places where I have put down a camera and I have sampled for at least 19 days, all the way up until 21 around there to get around 3 weeks of sampling. And we did 30 camera rotations for every single season except right in the early January to April area or March area. And in doing this, I was able to capture some photos of gray foxes, some coyotes, some bobcats, some northern raccoons, and other species. And I used all that camera trap data to make an occupancy model to find out where gray foxes are more likely to be versus where gray foxes are less likely to be. The influential factors that I put into my model were development, how much human influence is in the area based on impervious surface, rodent density. I did forest type combined with forest density. So there is evergreen forest, deciduous forest, mixed forest inside of the Wind Ranger, as well as woody wetlands and emergent herbaceous wetlands. There is also low, medium, and high density forests that I combined with those forest types to make low density evergreen, medium density evergreen, and high density evergreen throughout all of those forest types. And I also included an edge variable because some studies have just kind of said that edge is important, but not a lot have quantified the effect of it. When I put all of that into my models, I actually did 2 separate models at 2 spatial scales, one at 200 hectares to represent a home range to see what kinds of habitat would be more likely to include it in a home range, and the core area size to predict occupancy at the core area level, 10 hectares. And these are, at least right now, my results. So at 200 hectares, I found that deciduous forest, medium density deciduous forest at 25 to 50% covered by trees is important for gray foxes. They're more likely to occur in areas that have that type of habitat, and they're less likely to occur in areas with high density woody wetlands, 75 to 100% cover by trees. Same with the emergent herbaceous wetlands, medium to high density. They're 50 to 100% cover by trees. They do not like those areas. And then at 10 hectares, I found a couple things that they did like. So 10 hectares is the core area. the area they're most likely to spend their time. Deciduous forest, low density deciduous forest, 25 to 50% cover, they liked. Evergreen forest, 50 to 100, medium to high density, they liked. And the same with mixed forest, medium to high density, another type of forest that they liked. And still, we see the same relationship to woody wetlands from the 200-hectare model, except all woody wetlands they do not like here. Any percent cover of woody wetlands they are not a fan of. So some very interesting things. I remember mentioning that they do like those forests, so it's cool that we see that reflected in the model here. Now, granted, the majority of the Wind Ranger is forest, so that probably has an effect on that, but it is cool to see that. My next question for the last part of my thesis that I haven't fully gone over yet is there any evidence that gray foxes are suppressed by other mesocarnivores? So this is going into those interguild interactions. And we do have red foxes here in Louisiana, and I got 2 sites with them, so that's not quite enough data to put into my model. I would have loved to put them in here to look at their interactions, but I just quite couldn't. But what I do have here in this top left is the gray fox. And then I have coyotes in the middle left. And then in bottom left, I have the bobcat. And then in the bottom right, I have the northern raccoon. Not so much a predator by any sense, but still potentially a great competitor to the gray fox. And preliminary research, preliminary statistics I have found that high density deciduous forests, so 75 to 100% cover by trees in deciduous forests is kind of what delineates these species. Highly omnivorous mesocarnivores like the gray foxes and northern raccoons choose this area, but less omnivorous mesocarnivores avoid this area. So bobcats and coyotes that are more meat eaters, less likely to occur by these statistics in high density deciduous forest, and gray foxes and northern raccoons can eat a whole wide variety of things, more likely to occur in this area. That is everything I have. Does anybody have any questions? I know there was one at least during the chat, but I think, oh, here's one. Genus and species names refer to these guys as silver colored. Yes, it does. This is referring to the slide about the specific epithet and genus name of the gray fox, and their back pelage, their dorsal pelage, is mostly gray, and that's where they get their name from. Thank you, Casey.
I had another question, if
Thank
that's
you.
all right.
Go ahead.
Uh, on the intra-guild interaction slide, where it had those like multicolored triangles.
These?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know the units of psi on the y-axis, but is it expected that those have a linear shape as opposed to like a normal curve or a normal distribution or something like that?
So this is like predicted data. This is what you would expect. So it's kind of a simplified version. It's not quite real data, if that makes sense. Like for a real
Hmm.
species and real data about that species, yes, you would expect that normal distribution of the data. The psi is probability. So it's another like 95% they're likely to occupy here. Not quite units, it's a percent how likely they are to occur in an area. This is more so a representation of what we would expect to happen rather than the data we got from an area.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I see Charles has raised his hand.
Thank you, Katrina. That's excellent. Do you know whether there have been any predictions of how these grey foxes will be affected by climate change?
So if I pull back up, this is a little bit old, but you can see that portions of, I'm sorry, I know it's a lot of clicking, but here, this one is during the Anthropocene or the time of the humans. And this portion of South America they are less likely to inhabit these portions because maybe they're getting a bit too hot. There's also been deforestation in this area. So, they like forests, and deforestation is likely not very good for them. But
Right.
the climate change has warmed a bit of the northern parts of America and portions of Canada. So that's actually helping them expand their range a bit into places that were once too cold for them,
Right.
potentially.
Hmm. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ah, would anyone else like to ask any questions at this juncture?
Thank you, Cassie.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to echo that sentiment. It's been an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And I can see you improved it from since I last saw it. Well done. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'll make this available on the LMNA video channel. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great resource, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always an honor to present to you guys.
Thank you, Katrina.